You are listening to the Word Slinger Podcast, episode 77, Writing to Market with Chris Fox.
Writing a book. It can be the best way to build or grow your business, or to simply tell the story that you wish to tell. Learn how to write your book in 30 days or less. Pick up 30-day offer today from Amazon, Apple iBooks, or other online retailers.
It's the Word Slinger Podcast, where story matters. Build your brand, write your book, redefine who you are. It's all about the story here. What's yours? Now, here's the guy who invented pants optional, Kevin Tomlinson, the Word Slinger.
Word Slinger.
Hello, everybody. This is Kevin Tomlinson, the Word Slinger. Thanks so much for tuning in. This week, I am excited to bring you, this guy is someone I've met now in person. I had not met him at the time of the interview, which is kind of unfortunate because I think we probably could have had a little bit more discussion about this, the Smarter Artist Summit, which we both attended back in April. Well, still April technically, but earlier in April. But it was a remarkable summit, a remarkable writers conference. If you are an author, if you're an independent author in particular, but even if you're traditionally published, I would recommend attending this next year. I've already bought my ticket to attend this summit next year. So excited about that. And this guy, Chris Fox, was actually at the summit. We actually had a chance to kind of meet up, shake hands, have a little bit of conversation. And I think you're going to enjoy this interview if you are a writer. Chris actually has a ton of books that are actually aimed at the author entrepreneur. I think you're going to enjoy hearing what he has to say on the business of this. We talk a little bit about Writing to Market, which is his newest nonfiction book. I actually had a chance to read that in between this interview and the summit, and I wish I'd gotten a chance to read it before the interview. Actually, that's how it goes, time-wise. That's how things go. So, but it's a remarkable book. You're going to really dig it if that's something you're interested in. The topic itself is it's interesting in and of itself, just because this idea of, as writers, sometimes we don't want to be locked in on anything. We don't want to be told what to write, in other words. But there is something to be said for, audience consideration. And this goes kind of a step beyond that, where you're not just considering the audience, but you're considering the things that are successful with that audience. You're actually going out and doing a little bit of research and finding the books that are selling well in the category that is, if not exactly the category you like to write in, it's incredibly close. So this can be a lot of fun, actually. I've done this now with a book that should be releasing in May. And, I did some research on this, found the things that resonated with the readers of this particular genre. I'm looking forward to seeing how it does. So you'll enjoy that interview. Before we get to it, I wanted to answer a listener question. It was emailed in to me by Mark Cutts, and there are a couple of parts here, so bear with me. But the first question here, and this might actually work well with this conversation with Chris Fox today, so it's all relevant. So here we go. Mark Cutts asks, I'm struggling with which genre to focus on. I'm currently finishing up an MFA in creative writing, and that's a whole podcast right there, he says, and that is true. We could do that. And my thesis will be a novel that could be literary or YA or even a thriller or suspense. This is really a bigger question than that one novel, though. What genre should I write in? And he asks an additional question, and I'm going to address both of these, but the additional question is, what about branding yourself as an author of one thing? How important is it to start out as you mean to go on in the self-publishing world? Okay, so Mark, thanks, by the way, for that question. And if you have questions, you can do what Mark did. You can hop on wordslingerpodcast.com and ask. You can also call. I'll give the number in a second, but Mark's question about what genre he should write in, and whether or not the second question is more about should you stick to one genre as part of your author brand. And I will tell you that's the popular advice. There are authors who genre hop, and you hear good things and bad things. Really, I'm going to say that in general, if you want to move into a career as a successful author faster, your best bet is to find a genre and stick with it for as long as possible. It doesn't mean you can't write something else entirely later, but success is going to come a lot faster with focus. That's generally accepted wisdom in this industry, actually. Now, if you are determined that you want to kind of try your hand in a few different genres, there's no problem with that. You can do that too. It's just you just be aware that the more focused you are, the faster you'll see big results. Because readers like to stick with what they know. If they discover an author and they discover work they like, they're going to expect everything they read from that author to be pretty similar. So there are plenty of authors out there hopping genres. They're generally already established. Makes it much easier for them. So you might want to consider that. As to which genre to write in, now it may be different for the MFA. I would consider what genres appeal most to your professors, the people who are going to actually be reading this thing and giving you a grade and letting you pass the course on that. Find out what they like, and that's just writing to your audience, just like out in the real world, quote unquote. That would be my advice on that side. However, if you want to write if you want to pick a genre for your outside writing, the stuff that you're going to be doing for a career, my recommendation is this: look first at what you like to read, and I would say try your hand at some short stories in that genre. So pick a genre that you really enjoy, or one, you can even just pick one that intrigues you, even if it's not one you regularly read in. I would definitely read a lot in that genre if that's the case, but pick a genre that you frequently find yourself gravitating toward. Read as many books as you can in that. Pick the top level books. Pick the ones that are the most successful in that category. Read the top 3 at least, and then try your hand at penning a few stories on your own, some short stories that you can publish on a blog or something like that, so you can get some public feedback. I'm finding huge success in publishing short stories on my blog. Now, I've been slacking off lately because of all the traveling and conferences, and I'm finishing up a book right now, so I haven't published as many short stories lately, but when I do, my readers love them, and they help me fine-tune the genre that I want to be in and fine-tune the audience that's appreciating them. So highly recommend that. So if you're looking to find the perfect genre for you, it always starts with what do you enjoy reading. And I hope that helps, Mark. Now, again, for the guys looking at your dissertation, or in this case, I don't know if they refer to that as a dissertation in the MFA, but your final novel, I definitely would start asking around to see. Just do it, sir. Do it sort of sneaky. Go in and strike up a conversation with the professors that you know are going to be reading your work, and ask them what they're reading right now for enjoyment. Just a casual conversation. You can even invite them to coffee if you'd like, but just find out what they're reading, and then go off and read those books if you can, if you have the time. At the very least, I would read the first few chapters to see what the tone and style is like. And then I would find the common denominator for all of them, or get as close as you can to one, and write a book in that genre. That's what I would do. So I hope that helps, Mark. Thanks for the question. If you have a question, please go to wordslingerpodcast.com. You can click on the contact button. There is a little form. Sorry, I'm swallowing again. There's a little form there you can fill out really quickly to just let me know who you are and that you have a question. You can also, if you are more inclined, you can call 281-809-WORD. That's 281-809-9673 and leave me a voicemail, which I'd be happy to play on the air and answer any questions you have live right here on the air. So all that said, now let's get to the really fun stuff. We've got this interview with Chris Fox. I think you're going to really enjoy it. It ran a little short, so I'm okay with our longer opening this time around. But I think you're going to enjoy this interview, and please stick around afterward. We'll do a quick wrap up. But for now, enjoy this interview with Chris Fox, Writing to Market. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today here's what's funny. about this line of work in this business, you hear a lot of different names. You encounter a lot of different people. And this particular guest, we've been these passing ships in the night quite often. We end up being on the same podcast. We end up talking to the same people. And we actually write books that are oddly similar at times. So I'm actually talking to Chris Fox. He's the author of the upcoming, at least, I don't think it's been released yet, the book Destroyer, which he wrote in 21 fabulous days because he's awesome. And he's also the author of a book that's very similar to one I wrote called Lifelong Writing Habit, The Secret to Writing Every Day. I'm a big fan of encouraging people to write every day, Chris, so I'm glad to see that work from you. And welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. It's interesting. I feel like we've been within like 5 minutes of each other in so many different areas in the last 6 months. I keep hearing your name everywhere.
It's unreal, actually. And the fact that we haven't talked before now is kind of a crime. I'm glad we got a chance to remedy that.
It surprises me. I'm glad you reached out.
Yeah. So, all right, Destroyer. So I want to get to that first because that's the sort of most current thing that you've put out there, and it was part of your 21-day writing challenge, right?
Right. The novel is my attempt to show that my processes work. So Lifelong Writing Habit and 5,000 Words Per Hour, I try and teach the same thing you do, that people can write very, very quickly, and that doesn't mean that what you're writing is going to be low quality. So Destroyer is my attempt to prove that you can very quickly write a good novel.
Excellent. And so that was, what's the final word count on Destroyer?
64,000 words.
Okay, so that's pretty much, and that's sort of the religion I preach to people, that you can do, and I have a formula and everything, but it doesn't have to go that way. I mean, just sitting down each day to do that writing can knock out a book of that length in 15 to 20 days pretty easily. So, and it can be really good. It doesn't have to be. People always assume that it's going to be trash if it was written fast.
Yeah, I think it's funny, and I love bringing up just a simple comparison for everybody who writes. If you ask people, and you always get the same answer, what is the best scene you've ever written? Did you write it really quickly and it just flowed out of you? Or did you hunt and peck and tinker with sentences? And the answer I've run across time after time is I just kind of got into that flow state, and I wrote the whole scene really fast.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear people talk about flow a lot, actually, and I think sometimes people don't quite understand what that means. So, in your terms, what does flow mean for an author?
So a flow is a neurological state that you can get into. So they have measured this and can tell when a brain gets into the state. And it's when you're doing something that you enjoy and are competent at, to the point where everything else fades into the background. You are completely lost in that task. So time just seems to pass, and you sort of become one with your keyboard.
Yeah, and I live in that space, or try to.
Well, that's the interesting thing. We can really train our brains to get into that on command, and I think a lot of people assume that's not the case. That it just sort of has to come when the muse strikes you.
Right, the muse. That's a whole other discussion we can have, is muses and whether or not they actually strike. But so tell me a little about your process then. I mean, I'm always interested to hear how other people are doing this. I know I have my methods, and they work great for me. But sometimes when I talk to people about this, it doesn't gel with them. So I'd love to have another framework. So what's your framework for writing a novel in 21 days?
So the first rule is planning. You need to know what you're going to write ahead of time. If you are a pantser, I suspect that a 21-day novel challenge would be extremely difficult. As a plotter, it's easier for me. I'm actually releasing a series of videos right now on outlining and how I approach that.
Okay.
So when I went to write Destroyer, I had a very thorough outline with a lot of information about exactly what I was trying to achieve, and sort of what the scenes and characters were going to be. And that's why it was so easy for me to just crank through those scenes.
Right. I'm not much of a plotter, but I can tell you that it does have a lot of advantages and some hang-ups that I occasionally have with my books. It would have been better had I plotted everything out. So that's hard. That's hard medicine for guys like me, though. We don't want to hear that.
I think you can write just fine in whatever method works for you. So being a pantser is not necessarily a bad thing. I just find that since making the switch, because I used to be a pantser as well, I'm much more consistent in the quality and number of words I put out every day.
Yeah, I could see that. Now you're making me feel guilty. You're making me feel like I should. So what's the? Is there a shorthand you can give for getting started on the plotting of that then?
Sure. So the first video I put out was finding your premise. A lot of people skip this. So in high school, when they told us, okay, we're going to do an outline now, and you start with that piece of paper with the numeral one, the Roman
Right.
numeral one at the top, and you have no idea what to write. The reason you have no idea what to write is because you don't have a premise yet. So you have to sit down and brainstorm the basic idea for your setting, your characters, and your plot before I think you can do any outlining at all.
Right.
So my framework for that is picking another intellectual property it'll be similar to
Okay.
and using that as a starting point. So if I'm going to write a book like Destroyer, it's going to be, science fiction, then I'm leaning on things like Battlestar Galactica or
Okay.
Mass Effect or StarCraft to give me a feel for the setting I'm trying to create.
I like that approach a lot. I mean, that is kind of it's a shortcut. It's the same sort of idea as using the terms like doctor or fireman or something like that in your writing because it evokes an image without you having to do a lot of description. So it's a shortcut. And it feels like that's kind of the same general idea, right?
Absolutely. It gets the ball rolling in your head. And once that ball is rolling, then you can make whatever original choices you want to with your story. But getting from 0 to 1, where you actually start moving and writing, is the hardest part. And having kind of another example setting to use usually helps me get that moving.
That's very cool. So what about some of your other books? I mean, have you been using this same process long, or is this kind of a new development?
I'm continuously refining. So every time I write a book, I'm getting better and faster at this. I come from the startup world. I was a software engineer for
Yeah.
quite a few years. So I take that approach to it. I always want to make myself more efficient. So Destroyer was written faster and cleaner than any other book, but it built on everything I've done before.
Yeah.
If you get back to my first novel, No Such Thing as Werewolves, that took me over 2 years to write. I meandered a lot. I rewrote the book at least 5 or 6 times. I really had no idea what I was doing. I pantsed the entire thing.
Yeah.
So I have definitely come a long way in the last couple of years.
Yeah. So what changed things for you? What made you decide to go from the world of pantsing to plotting?
Two things. First, seeing how much money people were making that were doing the plotting thing. So I started seeing a bunch of writers in places like Kboards that could crank out a book a month. And
Yeah.
at first you're like, that's impossible. There's no way anybody can do that.
Yeah.
But then when they start showing you, yup, it's possible. I asked myself, well, how can I do that? I had a full-time job. I only had an hour a day to write. Was there a way for me to increase my efficiency and get to a point where I could crank out a book a month? And it turned out that I could.
Yeah. And so there are obvious benefits to doing that, of course. What do you see as the biggest benefit to being able to churn out a book each month?
You will improve incredibly fast if you do that. So
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
do one book every 3 years, it's going to take you 10 years to get to the same level of proficiency that I can do in 6 months.
See, I like that answer a lot because most of the time when we talk about this idea of releasing a book a month, it's usually about, sort of increasing your footprint and, making more points of contact and that sort of thing. So it's more of a marketing approach, but you just answered that in the terms of craft, which I really appreciate because no one ever really talks about that. But practice makes perfect, right? So if you're practicing, continuously and you're churning out a book each month, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I learned this from software engineering. So I used to tinker in my garage on apps on the side for the iPhone back when the iPhone first came out. And if you do one of those every 6 months, you learn a little bit. But all of a sudden, when you're doing that 12 hours a day, the difference in your skill level after 6 months of doing it every day is just insane. And
Yeah.
you can do exactly the same thing with writing. And if you want to be successful at this, you need to be a great writer, and you
Yeah.
become that by practicing.
Well, and that comes from that sort of hardwiring the daily habit thing. Like you're literally forming pathways in your brain when you do that, and so those sort of automated responses become faster and faster as you do them more, right?
Yeah, it's very much muscle memory. I mean, you'll get to the point where your brain will slip seamlessly into flow state within a few seconds, as opposed to it taking like 10 minutes when I originally started. And then when you're in flow state, you'll crank out these words automatically. I mean, every time I sit down to do a sprint now, I don't think about it. I just start the clock and I write. And that's
Yeah.
why there's no problem with me cranking out 5,000 words a day every single day. It's just a part of my routine.
Yeah, and 5,000 words a day will get you pretty far on a book each day. I mean, it makes it incredibly easy to churn out an entire book in a month. So I find that fascinating, by the way. We've you and I, again, the parallels, we sort of stumbled onto the the same patch of ground, coming at it maybe from slightly different routes. I was not a software developer, but I can certainly see how that would help you kind of develop that skill. One thing that I've noticed lately, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, lots of other podcasts at this point, but I've been writing short stories a lot more often, daily actually. Each day I'm writing one, and I never could do that before. But after kind of developing the daily writing habits and churning out a book a month, and all these things that I've done that are practice for me, that skill sort of just developed all on its own. It kind of came out of nowhere. So big benefits.
Yeah, and when you start seeing that, it really makes me grin. So, for example, I wrote the prequel to Destroyer. I started it on Wednesday. Today is Friday, and I finished it about 15 minutes before this podcast. 3 days, 15,000 words, done.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, so that's cool. So what? All right, so you've got Destroyer. When does it release, or has it? It hasn't released yet, right?
Destroyer comes out Monday, March 28th.
Okay, I thought I had seen something about that. So once that's released, what's the plan from there? Is it the beginning of a series, or are you is it a one and done kind of deal, or?
It's a trilogy, so this is book 1 in the trilogy. Okay. I've gotten all the covers for each of the books. Book 2 I'll be releasing on May 30th. Book 3 probably by June 30th.
Okay, and you plotted out each of those in advance before starting the first book, then?
The plot is roughly done, so I have a general arc for the whole series, but I tend to sit down and plot an individual book in much greater detail right before I'm going to sit down and write it.
Yeah. I admire you for that skill. Okay, I'm going to start practicing what you preach. I need to learn your method. So when are your videos coming out for that?
The second one was just released today, so they're on my YouTube channel. You can reach it through my website, chrisfoxwrites.com.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll check that out, and I'll put that in the show notes too for everyone listening. You have a remarkable level of output. And I envy it. I feel like I'm all over the place. Maybe I need to be a little better organized and kind of follow in your footsteps there. Maybe you can mentor me a little. So you've got 2 more books on the way for Destroyer. What else, fiction-wise? Have you got something else lined up?
I do. So fans are really pressuring me to release The Great Pack, which is book 4 in my Deathless series. Deathless is the most fun I have writing, as much as I love sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's really cool doing the mashup that I'm doing for Deathless. So I can't wait to get The Great Pack out. That should be out just before I go to the John Muir Trail in early August.
The Deathless books are they're really kind of funny. The premises are funny, at least. I enjoy, like, Vampires Don't Sparkle. That's just a nice tongue-in-cheek. Clearly inspired by a certain other set of books, right?
Yeah, that title was a lot of why I wrote the series. I wanted to kind of fight back against that whole Twilight push, so I made my titles a little tongue-in-cheek when I wrote them. I wanted werewolves and vampires to be scary.
Yeah, again, they used to be scary years ago, right?
Right.
What do you think happened there? Why do you think there is this shift away? I don't know. We've softened these things now. Now we have like these teen dramas on the CW that are all about werewolves and vampires falling in love. What do you think is happening there culturally?
Well, Anne Rice kicked it off, and she's horrified by this. I love hearing her talk about this. She made vampires sexy instead of these scary Nosferatu monsters, and in the process, it opened up a whole new brand of genre fiction.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know she had some regret about some of her work, but I didn't know she quite regretted that, because it's funny to think about it, but there was a time. I don't know that there's that clear of a line of demarcation, but there was a time where no one would have found vampires sexy in any way. So it's interesting to have seen that shift.
Yeah, and I think everything is cyclic. We'll come to a point where it is again, but for now, there's definitely a thriving kind of urban fantasy genre where vampires are more mysterious and sexy than they are dangerous.
Right. So let's talk about your nonfiction work, because you got several books out right now, and you got another one coming up soon. But you've the 3 that I know of. There's Lifelong Writing Habit, there's Right to Market, and then there was 5,000 words per hour, and that one was mostly about dictation, right?
There is a chapter on dictation, but it's about building a consistent writing habit and utilizing the tools you need to get into flow state on command. So it teaches writers how to do writing sprints, and in those sprints to be in flow state every time they do it. So doing that has kind of the byproduct of dramatically increasing your word count.
So how do you separate that work, the nonfiction work, from your fiction? I mean, it seems like I've tried this and I didn't enjoy it. I mean, there are two different marketing premises here that you have to follow. So how are you keeping all of that straight?
They're essentially two different businesses. So yeah, it is definitely a whole separate hat I have to wear when I'm doing nonfiction. But I found that I really enjoy teaching, and so I'm willing to kind of put that hat on some of the time and put out those nonfiction books because I get emails every day from people that are saying, "Wow, this book changed my writing life."
Yeah.
When is the next one coming out? And on top of that, they're lucrative, which is always a nice bonus.
That is a bonus, and it's also kind of the danger for some of us too, because there's a temptation there, and I think there are guys out there who are excellent fiction writers who are starting to kind of shift towards the nonfiction market because it is so financially lucrative. I have someone in mind. I don't want to mention him because he's a good guy and a good friend, but I know that he regrets. He doesn't regret it. He loves what he's doing. He loves working with people and teaching people these things and helping people. But he hasn't written fiction in quite a while, so it's kind of drained him a little. So I'm just kind of curious how you kind of keep up the energy for both.
It's pretty easy, and I know that's not a fair answer necessarily to everybody listening, but it's easy for
It's
me.
easy. I use cocaine. No,
Cocaine and methamphetamines. The way that I do it is nonfiction books are very quick for me to write, so I cranked out Write to Market in 3 days.
okay, all right.
And so I'll finish a novel, and then I'll take a week where I'll plot and write a nonfiction book, and then I'll get right back into fiction. So it's just kind of little breaks between fiction novels as opposed to the main thing that I'm doing, and that's how I've been able to balance it.
So how many words typically is one of your nonfiction books?
15 to 20,000 words.
Okay.
I think the advantage of nonfiction is that people like it shorter.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. That's why I actually kept 30-day very short for that reason. Unfortunately, when I created the print version, it's like, well, this is a dinky book. And it's kind of anticlimactic when you get the print version. I'm thinking of like padding it out with pictures of kittens or something. So, okay, I want to talk about workflow then, because you said you'll write the nonfiction books as sort of a break between fiction pieces. So your daily writing is not necessarily always dedicated to one or the other, right?
It's usually either or, but not always. So typically I will be working on one project and I'll do my writing for that in the morning.
Okay.
And then in the afternoons, I'll be plotting another project, either another novel or a nonfiction book, or in some cases both. I find plotting is a lot easier for me to do than the actual writing, so it takes a little less brain power. So that's kind of something I'll relegate to the afternoons when I'm a little more tired.
I like that, and I don't do plotting, so I can't say whether it would be better for me to do that morning or afternoons yet, but I'm planning to start, so maybe I'll follow your model, because for me, plotting is very difficult, but I think it's because it's not hardwired yet.
Yeah, that's just like the writing, where you get up to a point where you get into flow state very quickly. You get to the same place with plotting and editing, where if you do the same thing over and over and over, they become very much mechanical and just a habit.
Yeah. Do you share any of your outlines so people can kind of see how a book came to be?
I do. So these videos, which have been tremendously fun to do for both the 21-day novel challenge and outlining, I actually share the Scrivener file with mailing list subscribers, so they can look at how the file comes together. I screencast as I'm typing out scenes or doing outlining or editing. I show them how that whole process works. So my entire process is now an open book, kind of captured in video.
That's excellent. I'm going to check that out, because one of the difficulties I've had is when I read about that part of the craft. And you can see examples. I mean, they'll give you examples. Libby Hawker's book on outlining.
Take off your pants.
You take off your pants. Thank you. I was going in the entirely wrong direction, but that's an excellent book to me on the sort of art of outlining, but it didn't stick because it's kind of one of those things where I was exposed to the information, but I didn't get to see it in action, I guess. So it's cool that you're doing the videos, because now I can go watch you actually do it.
Yeah, they help a lot. I'm the same way, where reading about it in a book, it only helps me so much until I get a chance to practice it. But if I can see that in a video where somebody shows me exactly what they're doing and puts into practice what they're talking about, it sticks a lot better.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna go check that out too, man. It's funny. I read of your work. I've read a couple of pieces of fiction from you so far, and I read. I believe I read Lifelong Writing Habit actually, and enjoyed all of it. I'm so inundated with so many different awesome books. It's hard for me to narrow down what I'm going to read next. Reading my own stuff seems to take enough time. But I like your approach. Actually, I like your covers too, by the way. I don't know if
Thank
I
you.
mentioned that. All of them. I like the Destroyer cover as well. Did you get that through like 99 Designs?
I did not. I went with one of the most expensive, but also most renowned cover designers, Tom Edwards.
Okay.
So it was really expensive, cost me a little over $1,000. And here's a funny story for you. Originally, I had a different Tom Edwards cover for the first book. I realized it wasn't exactly what I needed. So on top of the $800 I originally spent, I paid another 1,000 to have that one created because
Oh, wow.
the first one I didn't think was going to do well. And after having seen the new cover, the one that's actually on the store now, I think I made the right choice.
Yeah. Well, it's an excellent cover. It harkens back to all my favorite sci-fi novels when I was growing up. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was kind of the goal because that's the reason I wrote the book. I mean, I really loved all those old, Battlestar Galactica and more recently things like Mass Effect and StarCraft,
Yeah.
and sort of wanted to bring that to life.
So, your book, Right to Market, I want to kind of talk about the sort of topic and the general idea behind that. So, tell us just a little about Right to Market real quick.
So, Right to Market came about when I realized that some of my books were enormously successful and some of them were not,
Yeah.
and that there was a common thread between the ones that weren't. So, the ones that were successful, I had either accidentally or intentionally written to a market I knew that existed. So, there were people that were going to read this type of fiction. I put it out, they bought the book. When I tried to go off the rails and do my own mashup, it wasn't nearly as successful. And so this light bulb kind of came on where I realized that because I don't have a huge following as a fiction author yet, if I want my book to be successful, I have to put out a book that people can recognize from the cover and the blurb as being something similar to what they already like.
And, okay, so that is logical, but how do you pull that off practically?
So how you pull that off practically, and the book breaks down the nitty gritty on this, is you look at a genre that you are very interested in writing. You study that genre to see what readers are currently buying. And when I say study, I mean you actually have to read.
Yeah.
You buy the books, you read the books, and you see what tropes they are using. So what is similar between, let's say, the three hottest selling books in military science fiction, and what do you need to do to make your book be similar to those three, but still original and a great story?
Yeah. Okay. So that's part of your research is to find the top three ish. You could go higher or lower, I'm sure, and then read those books. How are you finding that? I guess what I'm kind of circling around here is how are you researching the markets to find which markets are doing well? Are you writing specifically to enter a new market, or are you just trying to find the top sellers in the market you're most interested in writing in?
I think you need that intersection. So in this
Okay.
case, I looked at the 5 or 6 genres I was most interested in writing. Then I looked at the top 100 in each of those genres to figure out which would be competitive with a lot of people buying books, but not so competitive that I couldn't succeed in it.
Yeah.
And the intersection ended up being military science fiction. So I was also looking at urban fantasy, horror, and a few other genres. And this is the one that I think will work the best.
Excellent. So are you just using Amazon to do that research, or you have other tools?
I just used Amazon. The interesting thing, because I do have a series wide, is that Amazon still sets the trend. So because they have the most refined algorithms, if you're going to be studying how the market works, anything that you learn at Amazon sort of carries over to other retailers.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I've discovered that as well. I use Merchant Words to do keyword research, and I've found it works just as well on other platforms as it does on Amazon. So. So Amazon, yeah, and it's like the second best or second most used search engine on the planet, right?
Right.
So yeah, you got to trust it a little. As much as we get mad at it, I kind of get a little miffed at Amazon every now and then. They do like to control what I do a little too much for my comfort. But
Yeah, they can have a very heavy hand, but they're also helping to pay my rent, so I'm
yeah,
somewhat
it's
tolerant.
hard. Yeah, it's hard to be too mad at them. You know, that's where your biggest paychecks tend to come from. So you said you do go wide though. Do you use services like Draft Digital, or do you go direct to other platforms?
I go direct both because I didn't want to give up the extra share of money that I would give to Draft Digital
Yeah.
and Smashwords, and also because I know people at Apple fairly well.
Yeah.
I was an Apple iPhone developer, so
Yeah.
I kind of already had contacts there and ended up with a rep in the iBooks department, and that helped a lot.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah. That's an advantage a lot of people don't have, but I think it's not as much of a limitation as some people think. I mean, you can start cultivating relationships like that, I'm sure. I mean, as an app developer, did you find it difficult to interact with Apple and make contacts there?
Apple is a huge megalith, so it is a little bit difficult to find the person that you're looking for. In my case, I got lucky, and the woman who ended up being my rep actually reached out to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, working with her has been a breeze. She's been great about setting up promotions. Apple is super easy to work with, and I love them as a company.
Yeah, I'm kind of fond of Apple too. And I know they've got it's just like Amazon. They have their own, every now and then they kind of get a little out of hand and a little too in your business, but I think any company over a certain size is going to do that anyway.
Yeah, that's the downside of large corporations.
So let's talk a little about how you decide why and how you decide to transition from being a programmer to being a full-time author.
Okay, this was a difficult choice for me. So I went full time as an author on February 1st, and I waited probably 8 months longer than I had intended to. And that's because I worked for a startup that I believed in. So I was the only iOS software engineer. I did the mobile application for them. And finding people who can do what I did in the Bay Area is really difficult. So we kept shopping for a replacement. And because we couldn't find one, I stuck around a lot longer than I intended. I just kept, piling up savings, but I was working two full-time jobs, being a startup engineer and an author on the side. And finally, by February, I just reached a point where I couldn't handle both. Something sort of had to give. So I made the choice to go full time. We found a replacement for me at Cellscope, and I sailed off into the sunset.
That's a awesome story. That's very similar to Andy Weir's story. I think he had a similar experience because he was in software and he was a programmer, I believe, and then he decided, I guess, after the phenomenal success of a certain book, he decided to branch off. So
Yeah, it
maybe,
seems to be a common story. I know quite a few software engineers that have turned authors.
why do you think that is? Because honestly, you're like the fifth person I've met that has that sort of background.
So what you do, and tell me if this sounds familiar to you, when
Sure.
you are conceptualizing a program, you have to envision every piece of it, how they all relate together, and what each separate kind of module is and every object in it. So to me, it's very much like crafting a story. So if you've done that with programs for a while, it naturally lends itself to doing the same thing for crafting a story.
That's a very good. That's a great analogy of storytelling, I think, because it's sort of like a 3D view of crafting a story because you do see it allows you to better organize the information, but also see the sort of the if then statements that basically like if this happened, then this would logically happen or whatever the branches and the whole thing.
Yeah, if then else statements. I mean, the way that you
Yeah.
craft a program is exactly the same as how you lay out your story.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I never thought about that. With the sort of progression of people promoting coding as a skill for everyone now, with the White House backing it, and Code Academy and groups like that out there, I think it's kind of encouraging for there to be authors who are, coming from that background and building something with it and using that knowledge. Whether they're using it innately or not, they're still using the skills they learned from that background. So that's kind of cool. Maybe you should
Yeah.
write something code related.
I've considered it. I definitely have considered writing a software-based book for authors. So explaining how you can tap into software design to write a great story.
See, that I would definitely check that out. One of my goals for 2016 is to. I used to be a programmer. I was an engineer years ago. Okay, but things have changed quite a bit. I'm seriously behind the times, but I want to relearn coding and start doing a little more of it just for fun. I don't necessarily want to start a business around it, but I do want to get better at it. And I was actually thinking of. I don't know if you ever saw these when I was a kid. There were these books called Micro Adventures, and they were kind of like choose your own adventure stories, but they had little bits of basic coding, that as you read along, you come to this code, and then you have to enter the code in the computer and run the program to see what was going to happen in the book, basically.
That was my very first introduction to programming.
Yeah, same here. So those must have been very. I mean, you're kind of a kid of the '70s too, right? So they must have been very popular in the '80s. I have still maybe 3 of those floating around somewhere. I was thinking, that there's an opportunity for something like that today. Maybe you're the perfect guy to write that.
I'll have to consider it. I've got a lot on my plate.
Oh, I know. I'm not trying to put any extra work on you, man. But you're churning out like 1,000 books a month, so you ought to be able to do that. So, okay, you've got now. Marketing is this. Marketing is the hot topic always. Authors in particular, I think authors are afraid of marketing sometimes. So, how do you handle marketing personally? Like, what's a marketing strategy for you?
Well, it helps that I love marketing. Marketing is not what I think a lot of people envision. So they're thinking of cold calling. They're thinking of spamming your book everywhere and trying to get people to buy it. They're thinking of all those salesy tactics that we hate. And that's not at all what marketing needs to be. Marketing is all about you figuring out who your audience is and then getting your product in front of them. So you have to remember as an author, if you've written this great story and you want people to read it, you're almost doing them a favor by letting them know that it's there. It's not slimy, it's not sleazy, and you need to come at it more as if you're helping people and providing value and less like, hey, buy my book, hey, buy my book.
Yeah. Yeah, no one responds to that ever. Trust me. So, what are some more specific ways that you market? Do you use like Facebook advertising or anything like that?
I do. I use Facebook ads. It's not necessary to do so if you have the money to spend. I think it's a great way to experiment on growing your brand. But there are a lot of passive things that people can do. So many people don't realize that the blurb for your book, your cover, the look inside, your website, your Twitter, your Facebook, these are all forms of passive marketing. So having the best funnel set up so that you can drive traffic to your site and then capture the contact information of those people through things like mailing lists is probably the best cornerstone of marketing you can take care of. It's not advertisements, it's not BookBub, it's not ENT, it's setting it up so that your audience finds you and sticks around.
Yeah. And I like the approach, by the way. It's not the first time I've heard that if you have a good product, if you're doing something that you think is actually worthwhile and worth your time, then it's kind of a favor to the reader. Or actually, there's almost a kind of obligation to market your work, because otherwise no one's ever going to find it and not ever going to be moved by it.
Right, and I think that's true even if you're a traditionally published author. You need to market and let people know you exist, or how are they going to find your work?
Exactly. And okay, so what do you think of this? I've been seeing more of this lately, so it's top of mind. But this kind of setup where you've got, and I wish I could remember the writer's name. She posted something on The Guardian, and it was basically telling everyone why you'd be crazy to be self-published, and one of the statements she made was that if you're a self-published author, you're really in the marketing business. And she also resigned herself to just basically living in poverty. If she, only if she was going to be a writer, basically she wasn't going to make any money at it. She'd never make a living as a writer, and that's just not what you should be looking for. So, how do you respond to that?
Well, first, I feel really bad for her.
I do too.
I want you to rewind time for a minute. Let's go back about 10 years or so. Do you remember what you used to have for a cell phone in, say, 2006?
Oh yeah. 2006,
flip phone,
I had I think I had one of the Motorola flip phones.
Okay, and what do you have today?
I've got an iPhone 6 Plus.
Right. So I suspect the answer for anybody who is listening is I have an iPhone, I have an Android, or maybe I have a Windows phone, but you have a smartphone.
Right.
So I was on the cutting edge of the smartphone revolution, and how I went from working in collections to making 6 figures a year was I taught myself to develop apps before anyone else knew that this was going to be a viable way of making money. I was an early adopter.
Yeah.
And this circles back to publishing, because publishing is in the same phase right now. There are still an old guard of people who don't understand that the whole paradigm has shifted, and you're no longer in publishing as an author, you're in tech.
Yeah.
And you have to act like you're in tech, and you have to be a marketer, and you have to be an entrepreneur if you want to be able to make a great living. Authors who are traditionally published, the vast majority of them are not making a living wage off of their books, and they're part of kind of a dying ecosystem. But because they don't understand the new regime, they're terrified of it. So they're kind of lashing out as this market overtakes them, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad to watch that thrashing and lashing because it. I'm watching an industry that could redefine itself in such a way that everyone ends up being successful. It's sort of surrealistic to watch the whole thing unfold because it's like a battle between old guard and new guard, and the new guard doesn't actually care about the battle. It's in fact they're not even showing up for the battle. So basically, you have the old guard showing up in full battle armor and weapons and defeating themselves. It's kind of sad. So
Yeah, a little sad, but also inevitable and beneficial for people like us. That's for sure.
Yeah. Although I think that there's an opportunity. I just wish there was a way to get it through to the traditional publishing industry. But so you're you've got Destroyer coming out. You've got what's the new nonfiction book? I just looked at it and now it's out of my head.
Launch to Market will be coming out in April.
Which you're actually going to finish while you're at the Smarter Artist Summit.
Yeah, I'll be writing the last little bit of that there. And then the reason I'm waiting to publish it until the 21st of April is just that it includes sales figures for Destroyer.
I see.
And I want to make sure that those are current.
Yeah, okay. All right. So, by the way, and I brought up Smarter Artist because we're both going to be attending Smarter Artist, which is going to be kind of cool. We'll get to meet in 3D. That's nice.
Very excited. The summit's going to be a blast.
So what are you looking forward to most with that?
I think connecting with all these people that I know from the internet. So I've met, dozens of the people that are going to be attending this in different communities online, and I've never shook a single one of their hands. And I finally get to meet them in person and, have a beer with people like Brian Cohen. And it'll be really neat to finally meet in person and sort of put a face to the internet personality.
Yeah. Isn't it odd? I mean, we hear these people all the time. We have fairly intimate relationships with some of these people because of the podcasts. And even if they don't host a podcast, a lot of them are guests on podcasts. Brian's been on this show as well. And, you kind of get to know them in a weird sort of way. But you've never met them. Like, they're still familiar to you. All these guys are all very familiar to me. Like, I feel like we could all hang out and get along just fine. Some of them I've talked to and some of them I haven't. Most of them are going to be at this event, though, so it's going to be really interesting. So, all right, we probably should go ahead. We're kind of getting close to time. I want to go ahead and wrap up and let you get back to your regularly scheduled life. But is there anything that you're looking to promote right now? I know we've talked about pretty much all your books, but anything in particular you want to put out there right now?
Probably Destroyer. So Destroyer comes out Monday, and the reason why I want to promote that is less that it's a novel and more that it's an experiment that your audience will care about.
Yeah.
So this book was written in 21 days, and when I say written, I mean it was written and edited. I polished the entire thing up in that 21 days. Mm-hmm. And now my claim is that because this book is written to market, I'm going to be able to break into the Amazon 1000 and stay at a rank of 10,000 or better for the first month that it's out. So if you want to watch how Destroyer is doing, even if you don't buy a copy, just go check it out on Amazon, and you can sort of track my progress. I'm putting out weekly videos about the launch. The first one went live on Wednesday, and I'll be doing them every Wednesday, so you can sort of see whether or not the process that I espouse works.
I am definitely going to check it out because I'm interested to see. I mean, my books are written in that time frame, so I want to see how writing to market would help. Because apparently I'm not. Apparently I'm not quite there yet, but I'll get there. All right, Chris. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you being on. I'm glad we finally got a chance to connect. It's been probably too long, but let's not wait too long to do it again. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at the summit, man.
Yeah, I can't wait to meet you in person next week.
Yeah, it's gonna be a huge, horrendous party. I'm sure. I'm going to be exhausted for a good solid 3 or 4 days. So. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. Oh, you can also find more about Chris and from Chris at chrisfoxwrites.com. And you'll find links to his website, his Facebook page, everything you can possibly imagine, including links to Destroyer and a few other books besides in the show notes of this episode. Thanks, Chris, and everyone else. Stay tuned for the wrap-up after the show, and we'll see you all next week.
Hey, thanks, Kevin.
All right, that was my episode with Chris Fox. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got a lot out of that. I know I did. I enjoyed meeting Chris at the summit. It's unusual, actually, for me to interview someone on the show and then meet them in person. It's gone the other way more often. But the fact of that's in this an interesting landscape that we live in now. You know, this idea that you can connect to somebody. Now, Chris lives on the West Coast, the left coast, yeah, from my perspective anyway. I currently live in the Houston, Texas area, Sugarland, Texas, if you've heard of it. We would never meet. There's a very slim chance that we would have met if not for the wonders of technology, the internet, and that sort of thing. But because of the nature of the world now, I mean, we both write similar books. We both run in similar circles. We both promote ourselves in the same channels. I mean, it's interesting, and to have that sort of ship passing in the night kind of effect happen is kind of weird now. So I'm glad we got a chance to meet, and you know, I'm going to a lot more of these writers' conferences. You may see me out there. The next thing coming up for me, now I just came back from NetWo, which is the Northeast Texas Writers Organization. It was a small conference, but we got a lot out of it. I was there with fellow podcasters and co-hosts Nick Thacker and Justin Sloan. You'd be able to hear us on the Self-Publishing Answers podcast, and we recorded a live show from NetWo, which you'll be able to hear on SPA. If you go to spapodcast.com, it's not up yet, but it will be. Just be sure to find that on iTunes. You can find it on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. You can go on iTunes and subscribe to that podcast. There's a lot of great advice in there for indie authors in particular, and you'll be able to hear that live show when it goes up. So that was a fun one. That was a lot of fun. So, but that's all on the topic of conventions and summits and that sort of thing. I think I may actually try to book someone on the show where we can have a whole entire conversation about just that. Because I think there's, I don't know, there's something about that whole environment. You get to meet and hang out with these people, but, you know, these can be huge life-changing events. So I think you would enjoy hearing that. Let me know. Let me know if that's a topic you'd like to hear about. We're definitely going to discuss that on the Creative Writing Career podcast with me and Justin Sloan and Stefan Bugai. So keep tuning into that. Speaking of podcasts, excuse me. Now, if you would like to help support this podcast, you can do so by going to wordslingerpodcast.com. You can become a patron of the show. There's a Patreon button right there. On every episode, you can actually click on the little Patreon link and go, you know, you can commit as little as $1 a month. That's like $1/4 per episode to help support this show. I've got a big lofty goal of raising $5,000 a month to help pay overhead and expenses of the show. That's really about growth, though. I'll be honest with you. So the goal here is I want to keep providing these really cool interviews and these really cool resources for people, but I want it to go beyond just what I'm doing. Right now, I could probably continue this indefinitely as is. The real commitment for me is time. I mean, I do have some financial overhead when it comes to this, but the real commitment is time. Now, the more time I spend on podcasts, the less I'm spending on writing books. That doesn't make me a happy author, but but in a way it does, because it's a way. This is a chance. Believe it or not, you're actually a different audience than the audience I write to. And I'd love for you to hop in and read my books, and that's another way to support me in this. If you want to go to kevinthomason.com/books, you can see my whole library there. But for the most part, you guys listening to this show, you're entrepreneurs, you're authors, you're out to build something in the world, and that's kind of why I want to talk to you directly. This dream I have of putting a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs would say, it goes beyond just me. Like, I want to empower you to do some work out there too, so that if God forbid something happens to me and I'm gone, something I did, something I said, something I created can resonate on in the universe and create that dent, even without me there to see it. So that's part of what we're doing here. I want to create an environment, a community, I guess, but even beyond that, just create a sort of petri dish of creativity and innovation that allows me to help you. Now, you're hearing a truck, by the way, pull up, so that's the I'm just going to add, that's just local flavor for where I am. But and it sidetracked me a little, I apologize. So Anyway, if you'd like to support the show on Patreon, that is much appreciated. It's by no means required, but I do love everyone who has done that. I love you anyway, by the way, but I am especially appreciative, I'll say, of the folks who supported the show that way. You can also buy a copy of 30 Day Author. All proceeds of 30 Day Author at this point go to helping to build exactly that model of community that I'm talking about, where I can start kind of doing more. I just want to, I don't know, there's something out there waiting for me to discover it so that I can put all my time, energy, and resources into building it to help others. And I think that's going to come through this program. So you can be a part of that as I discover it and as we grow. So if you'd like to leave any questions or feedback, you can go to wordslingerpodcast.com and click contact in the menu bar. You can definitely leave me a message. You can ask me some questions like Mark Cutts did. You can also call me, 281-809-WORD. That's 281-809-9673. Leave me a voicemail on any topic you like. Ask any question you like. I will I'll make an effort to answer. Even if I don't know what you're talking about, I will make an effort. And if it's not family friendly, we'll just have to see. We'll have to see what turns out from that. I've got some huge news coming soon. I cannot tell you what it is right now. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. But I do want you to know it's coming. There's something really big. So you're going to want to keep tuning in each week to hear what happens. I swear it will be worth it. So thank you so much for tuning in this week. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for sharing. Be sure to go and review us on iTunes and Stitcher and now Google+. You can actually find the show on Google+. Rate us, rank us, give us a really good review, and spread us around. Now there's an airplane flying by. Unbelievable. Spread us around out there among your friends. Help them discover us too. I think we've got a lot to offer the world. You, me, everyone else. I think we've got a lot. We're building something big. So thanks so much for tuning in this week. Tune in next week. We're going to have another great interview. I've got someone lined up that you're really going to want to hear. And little teaser, little blank teaser. But thank you for your time, your attention, your support, and I will see you next time.
Word Slinger.